In the heart of ancient Rome, beneath the burning Mediterranean sun, stood a monument so powerful that even today it steals the breath of millions, the Colosseum. Its towering arches cast long shadows over history, and within those walls, legends were born in blood and sand. But the question still echoes through time: were the gladiators heroes of the empire, or were they victims of a merciless system? Imagine the roar of 50,000 spectators shaking the stone seats. Senators wrapped in white robes. Citizens hungry for spectacle. Emperors raising a single thumb that could decide life or death. This was not just entertainment, this was power. This was politics. This was survival. Most gladiators were not volunteers chasing glory. Many were prisoners of war, enslaved men captured from distant lands conquered by Roman armies. Others were criminals sentenced to fight as punishment. They were stripped of their names, their freedom, and sometimes even their identity. Yet, inside the arena, something extraordinary happened. These so-called slaves became superstars. Trained in brutal gladiator schools known as ludus, they learned to master swords, tridents, nets, and shields. They were forced to endure pain beyond imagination. Their bodies became weapons, their scars badges of survival. Every morning they trained knowing that one mistake in the arena could mean death. But they also knew that victory could bring fame, fortune, and possibly freedom. The crowd didn't see fear. They saw courage. They cheered for warriors like Spartacus, whose name would one day terrify the Roman elite. Though remembered today as a rebel leader, Spartacus first stood in the arena as a gladiator, fighting not just for survival but for dignity. His story reminds us that even in chains, the human spirit refuses to break. But was courage enough to call them heroes? To the Roman public, gladiators were symbols of strength and masculinity. Children collected small clay figures of their favorite fighters. Women admired them. Poems were written about their victories. Some gladiators even became wealthy and chose to continue fighting despite earning their freedom, addicted to the adrenaline and the applause. Yet behind the applause was a darker truth. Gladiator combat was carefully organized brutality. Fights were often deadly, especially in earlier periods. Wild animals from Africa and Asia were brought to battle men in staged hunts called venations. Prisoners were executed publicly for entertainment. The arena floor, covered in golden sand, often turned crimson before sunset. The Colosseum was not merely a stadium. It was a machine designed to display Roman dominance. Every drop of blood reinforced the empire's message: Rome is powerful. Rome is unstoppable. And the gladiators? They were both the proof and the price of that power. Some historians argue that gladiators had better living conditions than many slaves. They were fed nutritious diets, received medical care, and trained professionally. Their owners had invested money in them, so keeping them alive made financial sense. Inscriptions discovered in Rome reveal that fallen gladiators were sometimes honored by fans who mourned their deaths. But can comfort inside captivity ever equal freedom? Imagine standing in that arena. The sun blinding your eyes. The sand hot beneath your feet. Across from you stands another man, just as afraid, just as trapped. The crowd demands blood. The emperor watches silently. You fight not because you hate your opponent, but because survival leaves you no choice. Is that heroism? Or is that tragedy? Perhaps it is both. Gladiators displayed undeniable bravery. They faced death repeatedly and walked into battle with discipline and skill. Many fought honorably, saluting the emperor before combat. Some showed mercy when allowed. They became legends not only because they fought, but because they endured. But they did not choose the system that exploited them. The Colosseum represents one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. And one of its darkest moral contradictions. It was beauty built on suffering. Applause rising from agony. Glory born from captivity. As the sun set over Rome and the crowds dispersed, the surviving gladiators returned to their cells beneath the arena. The cheers faded. The silence returned. Tomorrow, the spectacle would begin again. And the question remained. Were they heroes, or were they victims? Before we step into the second chapter of this story, take a moment to think. If you had lived in ancient Rome, would you have cheered from the stands, or questioned the cost of the entertainment? If you're fascinated by the hidden truths of history and want to uncover more stories buried beneath time, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join this journey into the past. Because the next chapter reveals something even more powerful, the rebellion that shook Rome itself. History does not remember the silent. It remembers those who rise. Decades after the Colosseum first opened under Emperor Titus in 80 AD, the gladiatorial games had become deeply woven into Roman culture. But beneath the roar of the crowd, resentment simmered. For every triumphant fighter lifted on the shoulders of fans, there were countless others who dreamed not of applause, but of escape. Among them was Spartacus. Though his rebellion began before the Colosseum was completed, his story symbolizes every gladiator who dared to imagine freedom. In 73 BC, Spartacus and around 70 other gladiators escaped from a training school in Capua. Armed with kitchen knives at first, they quickly seized real weapons and began what would become one of the greatest slave uprisings in Roman history. Their rebellion terrified Rome. For nearly 2 years, Spartacus and his followers defeated Roman armies sent against them. Former slaves, shepherds, and peasants joined their ranks. They were not trained soldiers, yet they fought with desperation and unity. Their dream was simple: freedom from chains. But Rome does not tolerate rebellion. Eventually, the Roman general Crassus crushed the uprising. Spartacus was killed in battle, though his body was never officially identified. Thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way as a warning. It was a brutal message: no one escapes Rome. And yet, the legend of Spartacus survived. Why? Because his story transformed the image of the gladiator. No longer just an entertainer in the arena, he became a symbol of resistance. A reminder that even the oppressed can challenge an empire. Back inside the Colosseum, the games continued for centuries. Gladiators still fought. Crowds still cheered. But over time, attitudes slowly shifted. Philosophers questioned the morality of the games. Early Christian leaders condemned the violence. Economic pressures weakened the empire. By the 5th century AD, the gladiatorial games faded into history. The Colosseum itself endured earthquakes, looting, and neglect. Its stones were reused to build churches and palaces across Rome. Yet it never disappeared completely. Today, it stands not as a place of death, but as a monument to history. When modern visitors walk through its arches, they do not cheer for blood. They whisper in awe. They take photographs. They reflect. And perhaps that is the final answer to our question. Gladiators were victims of a brutal system that valued spectacle over humanity. They were forced into violence, stripped of freedom, and displayed as living entertainment. But within that system, they demonstrated extraordinary courage, resilience, and even honor. They were victims, who became heroes in the eyes of history. Heroism is not always about choice. Sometimes it is about endurance. The gladiators did not design the arena. They did not create the empire's hunger for blood. But they walked into the sand with strength. They fought with skill. Some resisted. Some survived. Some inspired revolutions. Their legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, entertainment, and human nature. Even today, we must ask ourselves, why are we drawn to spectacles of conflict? What does it say about society when suffering becomes entertainment? The Colosseum no longer echoes with screams. Instead, it teaches. It teaches that greatness and cruelty can exist side by side. That architecture can be magnificent, yet morally troubling. that victims can become symbols of courage. So were gladiators heroes or victims? They were both. They were men trapped in history's harshest spotlight, warriors forged by circumstance, remembered not just for how they fought, but for what they endured. And as you imagine the fading sunlight touching the ancient stones of the Colosseum, remember this: every monument holds two stories, the story of power, and the story of those who paid for it. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind the gladiators and want more powerful, cinematic journeys into history's greatest mysteries, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support keeps these stories alive. Because history is not just about the past. It is about understanding who we are today.